unnecessary intro song to totally waste your time.
Are you self-aware? Like, do you know what you're doing? Do you know why you're doing it? How do you know you're self-aware? Can you even answer that question if you're not self-aware? I don't know. How do you know if you're self-aware? Is that a job that only somebody else can have? Does it take another person to analyze you and tell you whether or not you are self-aware? That's kind of like a riddle, isn't it? I like to think I'm kind of self-aware, but maybe I'm just a total skeptic, you know? It's hard to know whether we're self-aware or not. I certainly, when I see others, I often determine that they aren't self-aware, but maybe I'm just being kind or giving them the benefit of the doubt. You know, like when you see somebody saying something or obviously projecting one of their qualities or sins onto another person. Like, you can observe them in a certain behavior, and then you can see them and watch them blame another person or accuse another person of that exact same behavior. And one might be left wondering, do they know they are doing that? Are they self-aware? Or is that some sort of weird physiological phenomenon where people project themselves onto others in weirdly disdainful and hateful ways while not knowing they're doing that? You know what I mean? Can being evil towards others be an ignorant act of self-hatred? Can it? Or is it intentional and knowing? And which one is worse? See, I tend to go with I would rather call somebody dumb than I would call them evil. The gymnastics I'm trying in my mind is if they're ignorant of what they're doing, the forgive them for they know not what they do routine, then there's some kind of hope, you know, because you think, well, they're just lacking a little bit of self-awareness, and maybe with a few exercises, you know, a few sessions looking in the mirror and going within, you know, calming down, that they can work their way around it, and maybe there's an aha moment available to them where the lights come on and they go, oh, I see. I'm the racist. These ideas that I'm projecting onto others actually originate in my own mind. These are my thoughts that I'm projecting onto others. I'm not reading other people's minds. I'm projecting thoughts onto them. Is it that? Is it self-awareness that's missing? Or is the self-awareness there and they are actually acting in a calculated self-protective way wherein a good offense is the best defense. Kill them before they kill you. Accuse them before they accuse you. You know? Crucify them, because how is somebody crucified? How is a dead person going to come after you? You know? If you spot something evil in somebody else and you notice that about yourself, maybe you're so self-aware that you go, oh shit, that person probably knows that I'm one of them. Therefore, I'll accuse them. The mob will go after them, and that will buy me time. I really am stuck on whether or not people are operating that way. Because my choice seems to be they either lack the self-awareness, and there's some sort of dark nature about people that is so tribal and so, deeply ingrained that it's the background operating system, and it's going on, and the host isn't really even aware. It's kind of like, is a robot aware that it's doing what it's doing, or it's just following a set of commands, codes? And I don't know, because, again, am I self-aware? It's hard to say. It's getting into stoner territory here, isn't it? But only what we can observe in others, these conflicting behaviors, evidence of somebody engaged in a certain activity or process, behavior-wise. They're actually engaged in it. You can see the behavior. Jack is bouncing a ball whilst yelling across the street, calling Jill a filthy ball bouncer. She's a filthy ball bouncer. Right, Jack, we can see you bouncing the ball. But then again, once the bouncing ball turns into instead of it's a literal bouncing ball, him bouncing it, maybe he's just got bouncing balls painted all over his house. Maybe he watches bouncing ball movies. Maybe he never owned a ball, but his favorite movie is the ball bouncers. Maybe he writes stories about ball bouncers. Maybe he dreams about ball bouncers. And maybe Jill across the street doesn't have a ball either, but he calls Jill a filthy ball bouncer. He's the one obsessed with bouncing balls. So when he looks at Jill, he only sees himself. He sees a filthy ball bouncer. He's projecting the contents of his mind onto her. And I suspect that projection comes through some sort of weird guilt or shame about his obsession with ball bouncing. Do you know what I mean? And the question I have for today's podcast is, does he know it or not? And should I even try to answer that question? Because if I answer that question in the affirmative, that yes, he knows that he himself is a filthy ball bouncer, and he's accusing others in order to deflect and buy time, well, then I know that evil is afoot. And evil is afoot with toes. I already made that joke in another podcast, but I can pretty much guarantee that not one of you heard this podcast and that podcast. You see, because I have access to data, I can see which podcasts aren't getting listened to at all. But I refuse to engage in clickbaity titling to try to get people to listen. Anyway, it is a good question, self-awareness. I don't know who has it. I kind of always just assume, I think this is maybe a bad assumption, but I think it's a safe assumption. I like to go through the world assuming that people, by and large, have much more in common than not. But I'm also aware that might be a huge blind spot, a huge point of ignorance on my part. That's wishful thinking. I think it could be wishful thinking. It could very well be that most people have absolutely no interest in even the idea of self-awareness, and that possibly, maybe, nature doesn't see self-awareness as being helpful to its purpose, whatever that purpose may be. I don't know. But it could very well be that automation, a lack of self-awareness, a lack of consciousness, so to speak, and this is the big debate in the animal world, whether or not animal rights, it's hard to watch little animal videos, and I see them thinking. I see my dog thinking. I know Dum Dum will stay on the bed if I'm in the kitchen, and she's listening for all the cues and sounds. To me, in her mind, she's going through all of them. But when she hears a certain sound, which is the packet of hot dogs in the fridge, she goes, "Ooh, I know what's going on now." And then she gets up and she comes in. Thinking. Who thinks and who doesn't think, and what are they thinking about when they're thinking? It's hard to say because we can never, ever leave our own bodies, jump into somebody else's mind, and see what it's like. And even if we could, we'd be bringing our own mind with us. And so that analysis would already be tainted. We can't know. It's hard to know. It's hard to know if people are operating as, NPCs, non-player characters. I assume that they aren't. I assume, like I was getting back to, I almost made the point, but then I got sidetracked with Dum Dum. I like to assume that they're more like me. And I feel like I am kind of self-aware. Like I sort of know when I'm projecting or doing something terrible, or when I'm involved in a crime or in a lie. I know when I'm doing it, I know when I'm doing it. I might not know all the reasons why, because there might be background reasons, childhood trauma, XYZ, but I know I'm doing it. Even when I'm fooling myself, I'm at least partially, if not mostly, aware that I'm engaged in self-dupery, justification. And that's not hard to do, because you can always, twist a thing. But are other people doing that? Or are they just operating on basic code? And I know I've brought this up a couple other times recently, but I'm beginning to realize that most people, and I'm saying maybe even a large majority, like maybe even like 90% of people, really just simply don't have the same interests that I have, which are arguments, reason, logic, I just don't think they do. I think they're more interested in their group, their tribe, their family, or whatever. And whatever controversy arises, they quickly assess what their tribe or their team thinks about something, and then whatever answer or whatever option fits into that, whatever that tribe wants, that's what they want. And there isn't even the idea of presenting logic or reason is futile at that point, because they're not interested in that. And you know what's funny? There's a story that kind of goes along with this. When I was a Mormon missionary in Brazil, I realized about halfway through, there was this thing where Mormon missionaries, we knock on doors and we look for people to teach, give these lessons to, and then eventually baptize them, hopefully after about, a month and a half or whatever, as fast as we can, really. But I had older, they call them companions. I know it sounds super gay, but, you run around in twos, and they always put an older companion, or a more experienced companion that's been in the field longer, with a greenie, a new one. And I noticed that my older companions would, knock on the doors, and since the men were men were at work while the women were at home, the women would invite us in, and then they'd try to talk to them. And I realized that always caused problems. It's like, why are these two young American men going into a house of a married woman and talking to her about personal things like God, So I figured out about halfway through my 2-year mission that I wouldn't do that any longer. I was like, I'm not going to teach a woman unless her husband's home. I would say, when's your husband going to be home? I know this sounds super sexist right now, but hear me out. I thought, why would I cause controversy in the house? Why not just wait till he's home? And also, I'm lazy too, right? So I realized that there's already a hierarchy in that house, probably, in some way, or at least, I don't know, maybe there is. At least I wouldn't know unless I found out. So I'd say, when's the husband going to be home? And then I'd set up a time to teach the husband. Well, and what I noticed is that my success rates went much further through the roof. Like, baptisms came much easier. And by the way, I'm not trying to say I was a good missionary, because I wasn't. I was lazy as fuck. And this is actually part of the evidence that I was lazy as fuck. I realized that if I was teaching a single woman and her kids, it was an uphill battle, because the man would be resisting it. And so there'd be a fight after I was left. But if I got them all together, then he would take the lead. And not only if he felt like it was his choice, he would do my work for me. And he, after we left, since I was respecting his position, he would be the one to convert the wife and kids. And I took that a step further later, where in one area I had a couple companions, and I did a challenge. I said, let's figure out who the leader of this street is. It was a really poor area, and we determined this one guy was kind of the leader of the street. And I said, we won't teach the first lesson until we can agree to get everybody on the street to meet at his house, right? And we did. It took us a long time. It took us a couple weeks, but we made friends with the leader of the street, right? The head honcho on the street. And we got him to start doing our work for us. We said, we want to have a meeting at your house. We want to host it. We want everybody on the street to come, and we want you to host it. Well, anyway, long story short, we did it, and ended up baptizing like 25 people on one day, because we targeted the leader instead of the followers, So going back to what I'm trying to say about the tribalism is, I think that most people are simply followers. And what that means is that they're not making independent decisions. They're not programmed that way. It's like when you look through nature and you see, drone bees or an ant colony or whatever. It's just like that. So if you want to really change an individual member of a tribe, what you really have to do is you need to change the focus of that tribe. And the only way you can really change the focus of that tribe is by changing the views of the leadership of that tribe. You have to target the self-aware leader of that tribe if you want to see any change. I've kind of veered off course here. But I think it might be true. I think I've wasted a lot of time in my life treating individual human beings as if they behave that way. I'm starting to realize that most people don't behave as individuals. And that's not to saying I'm changing my policies. I still believe that individualism is the policy because you want to protect the individual. The individual is the smallest minority. But to assume that individuals want to be treated as individuals, I think is probably a big sign of my own naivete. Is that how you say that? The little accent in the end. I think I've been pretty naive. I mean, kind of. I mean, I obviously developed that way of teaching in Brazil, so I obviously knew this same shit even back then. But there's this weird denial that I've been fighting that I just want so much to believe, I guess, that I have more in common with people than I don't. And it just might not be true. It might be true that I have almost nothing in common with most people. And that I really want to think for myself and demand that I think for myself. And I think most people are absolutely scared shitless by thinking and behaving for themselves. Anyway, how can we spin this into something that isn't so dark? Well, let's try. I think maybe the problem here is, in my earlier example, and this might be the problem with this big divide in the country. And I just tried to not get dark, but I might be going darker. The big divide is, I think that there might be two types of people. They're all projecting, but I think a lot of times good people project their goodness onto others. They see a criminal or a rapist or something, and they think, oh, no, something went wrong. You have to understand them. And, the defenders, they might be going, well, they can't be that bad. They're projecting their own sense of goodness onto others. And then others project their own sense of malevolence on others. I think it can go both ways. You can project your sins onto others, and you can also project your virtues onto others. I think both of them are probably wrong. I lean towards projecting virtues onto others. And that might be what's wrong. That might be why, air quotes, evil gets an edge. Because while good people are assuming that the bad people are good, the bad people are assuming that the good people are bad. Ooh, what a riddle we have there. Anyway, let's just bring it back home to us you and me, we can probably commit at least to engaging in good things and being aware, self-aware and aware of the strategies of others. And maybe that can help us combat the air quotes evil forces. And maybe things aren't so bad after all anyway. Maybe things are pretty good. Certainly can find a lot of good if you look for it. So, you can always try that. Thanks for listening.